Welcome, Michele, to Life Repurposed, and thank you for sitting down to talk with me today.
I've been looking forward to this.
So I noticed in your bio you talked about days at the ocean. I'd love to know what a day at the ocean looks like for you.
Well, we have done this ever since our kids were little. We basically pack them up, pack enough food to last for the whole day. I had 4 sons, and so there's a lot of salt and sand and crashing into waves, and just the day at the ocean is an event. And so we'd have a picnic, and the kids would enjoy the tide coming and the tide going, and we still do that even though I've got 2 married sons, and everybody's kind of off doing their own thing. At least once a summer we try to schedule a time when all of us that are in the state at least can get together, and the grandchildren are there now, and we use lots of sunscreen, and we still pack up lots of food. And of course there are certain menu items that are required, like whoopie pies, and it's just a fun day, and it's something we all enjoy.
It does sound fun. I'm a boy mom too, only I have only 2 of them, so I can't imagine raising 4.
Well, a boy home has a certain character to it and a certain decibel level, as you know. So.
Yes, it does. So do you feel like raising boys changed you, like, in personality, or have you always been the same?
Oh, heavens. If you know how they had the senior superlatives, like most likely to succeed and most scientific and all that, if there had been a least likely to have 4 sons and be happily married to their father, I would have won that one. I just had so much to learn. The first time my kids played in the mud, and they rolled in a puddle. And the first time the 2 oldest came to the door covered from head to toe, I just cried because I didn't know what to do. I mean, what do you do when they're just that covered? And I had so much to learn about just chilling, just ride with whatever's going on, and don't try to control every stray atom in the universe, and enjoy. In fact, I wish I had enjoyed them more. I wish I had just,
me too,
had let my hair down a little bit more and just let things be. But I think, yeah, definitely I have changed because of the boys.
You're telling my story, I think, because it's the same thing. It's like the first time we got out Play-Doh, I freaked out, or having them help me bake in the kitchen. I wish I had been a lot more relaxed about it.
Yeah, all they want to do is eat the dough. It's crazy. And just everything's a mess, but that's how they do life.
Yeah. What they want to do is dump the flour on the floor, then get out the Hot Wheels cars and make roads through the flour is what they want to do.
Things that would not even occur to you. And the things that you hear yourself saying to them are just over the top. Things you never would dream anybody would do. You're saying, don't do that.
Yes. So tell me a little bit about, we're going to go back and rewind a little bit to your own childhood. Tell me a little bit about growing up. What was your faith journey like?
Well, I came to faith through the ministry of my local church. I didn't really grow up in what I would call a Christian home. Things were pretty well dominated by alcoholism and mental illness as I was growing up, and it just felt very tumultuous. So when I graduated from high school, I went off to college and decided to just move on, which has been a pretty good strategy. And I didn't really have a falling out with my parents. My mom lived with us for 5 years at the end of her life. And so we weren't estranged, but I just knew that I needed to keep my distance and have, boundaries, and that worked really well. But right from the beginning, it seemed like the following life, the Christian life for me, was about ministry, because I found out pretty early on that I could teach. And of course, when you're 16, the only people that you can really teach are kids. So even though I really had never been a person that enjoyed kids, I learned to teach kids and did a lot of that kind of ministry, went to camp and was a counselor and taught 5-day clubs. And so I ended up majoring in Christian education when I went to college, just because that seemed like the next reasonable step. And So I guess that's basically been that's the trajectory that I was on. And as we kind of came into the chapter of the book, Life Repurposed, that I shared, that picked up my journey there in college. And all of a sudden, I looked around at what I believed. And when you're studying theology and when you're really getting into it with textbooks, and you've got a 3-inch thick commentary on Romans that you've got to read by Friday, you really start to question things. And my theology was fine. I never did doubt the providence of God, or any of the big doctrines, but it was the trappings that were driving me crazy. I just couldn't live inside the structure that I had built. And I think it had to happen at some point. What I had built as a system of doing life collapsed under its own weight, because it was built so heavily on external appearances and requirements and box checking. And well, this is what Amy Carmichael did, so I guess I better do that. And Elizabeth Elliot kept a journal, so I guess I better keep a journal. And this person has an alphabetical list of missionaries that they pray through at 5 o'clock in the morning. And so, I was closing a Pizza Hut restaurant at 11 o'clock and getting up at 5 so I could have my devotions before I had an 8 o'clock class. And I mean, it just became completely unmanageable. And I ran into a quote just recently by Eugene Peterson. He says that everything, absolutely everything in scripture is livable. And, that's a challenging statement if you've read the Old Testament, especially if you've read Ezekiel. Ezekiel's my hardest book of the Bible, but it's all livable. And so if we've built ourselves something that just seems completely impossible to us, then we've gone outside of what God even requires of us. That's not to say that he doesn't often require hard things, because he does. But if it's scriptural, then it's always possible to do the will of God. And so what I had built really needed to collapse so that I could start all over again. So that's what happened.
So in the chapter in the book, you talk about being at a Christian college when you started to wrestle with doubt. What was it like to be in that environment? Who could you express your thoughts to?
Well, I really didn't. That's the thing. I'm sure that no one that I went to school with at that time would have thought that I was struggling with anything, because I had a great GPA and I followed the dress code, because this is back in the 80s, right? When you had, pantyhose and all that kind of thing. And it was in the South. So even more so, the Bible Belt down in Georgia. So it was this, all of a sudden, I just couldn't do all the external stuff anymore. It just became so hard for me to drag myself into chapel and sit there, because I think it was a combination of cynicism, because in any Christian college, in any gathering of believers, there's hypocrisy. And anytime you do anything, I don't care what it is, if it's a spiritual thing, legalism isn't far behind. You have to really guard yourself against that all the time. And so that unlivable system had just become just so hard for me to live with. But I was at the same time very focused on my academics. And so that, I think, people weren't looking, rebellion in a Christian college has a certain look, and I didn't have that look. So no, I don't think anybody was even aware of it, really.
Yeah.
It was a relief to find my way back into some spiritual practices that felt enriching without being enslaving. That you can pray every single morning at 5 o'clock and it's enriching. It doesn't have to be enslaving. It's really ironic. We build these structures and they create space for God to meet us in. And that's a very healthy thing. It's a habit of holiness that we want to cultivate, but they can become something that they never were intended to be. And so I try not to let the tail wag the dog. The main thing is to meet with God. It's not what I do in the process of meeting with God. So, I try to resist anything that feels hollow or
Mm,
formulaic, because that's when you start to be controlled by the form rather than
right.
the substance of it.
So, one of the things you talk about in your chapter in Life Repurposed is that it really is a journey and that it isn't just a switch that flips. So, what would you say to your younger self if you could give advice now looking backwards?
I I think I would just say that it's important to start where you are, use what you have, and go forward. Don't try to live your way back into a former faith, because you're not the same person as you
Mm,
were when things started to slide. And that was hard for me, because I remembered being having a very sturdy and very um, emotional, even very confident faith. And I couldn't find my way back there, but I wasn't the
mm,
same person that I had
mhm,
been back in those days. I was trying to live my way back into high school, and I had graduated from college. And we did a kitchen renovation a couple of years ago, and the picture of tearing that kitchen apart and going right down to the studs, the shiny silver insulation was showing. It was a mess, and it was the worst. It was such a mess, but we had to do that in order to create the new kitchen. And that's
mm,
really what had to happen for me spiritually. I really had to go back to the studs. And the thing that was surprising to me was, as I was rebuilding, so much of what I had learned and what had been legalism for me back under the old way became part of the new structure.
mm,
um, First Peter talks about, Peter talks in his letter about newborns, and desiring the pure milk of the word, and growing, and all these images and metaphors about growing. And I think we have to start like that and then grow into something new, and we have to be really patient with ourselves.
mhm. I love that word picture of tearing back to the studs because that is so in line with a life repurposed. It's getting rid of the stuff that doesn't belong there anymore and renovating.
Hmm.
And so I
Right.
love that's just an excellent word picture because that's not a fun process. Anybody who's literally gone through remodeling in their home knows it's not fun, and spiritual remodeling can be painful too.
It is. And we tear out the things that we're not using anymore.
Mhm.
We have a tendency to make good things in an end in themselves.
Mm.
The basics are there. Prayer, Bible study, journaling, meditation, memorizing scripture. Those are all important building blocks, but they're not an end in themselves. They're a way that we create space for grace in our
Mhm.
lives, and God meets with us there. And that's the end. That's the point of it all. So.
You have a blog that I'd like you to talk about because just looking through a little bit of it, it's such a great resource. You're blogging really regularly. Is it how many times a week are you posting?
On Wednesdays, I usually share either a devotional post, or I started out as a book review blog because I love to read. And it was like, wow, publishers will send me books for free, and I can read all these books. And when you read, you can just see people's eyes glazing over when you start talking about your books. If they're not readers, a lot of my
Mm,
friends are more fiction readers, and I have tended to read more nonfiction. And I'd still read some fiction, but all of a sudden you have this outlet for sharing what you're reading, and people are interested because a book blogger attracts other people who like to read. And so it started out that way, and then I have moved more towards doing all my book reviews at the end of the month
mm,
in one big post, because I feel like the Lord has given me things to share that I want to talk about. So sometimes it's about parenting, and I guess my blogging is that intently haphazard kind of thing, like like what I talked about with my devotional practices.
So
But
where can people find that? What's the address?
my blog is michellemorin.net, and it's Michelle with one L. So Michele Morin, Morin.net.
Michelle, I want you to leave our listeners with a last thought. What would you want to share with the person who's listening in today?
I guess if you're in a situation where you feel unhappy with your relationship with God, if you feel like it's tired, if you feel like it's become work, like it's something that you're on a treadmill and you're just trying to keep it going, I would urge you to stop and just rethink things, to project yourself into a future, what needs to change, and then just dare to do that, dare to tear out the kitchen, start over again, and figure out what it is that what components are necessary for growth. Do you need to read more? Do you need to read less? What feels tired to you? And have the courage to just start over, because curiosity is so much a part of really who God made us to be. And once you're sure that you're right about everything, once you have the idea that there's nothing new out there, you stop taking in information, and that is a sad place to be. It's suffocating. So I would just encourage people to ask themselves what story they want to be able to tell down the road, and then figure out what they need to do to make it happen.
Yeah. Great words of wisdom. Thank you, Michele, for sharing your heart with us today.
Thanks for having me.